Last year, Bedtime Stories for Insomniacs won Best Fiction Podcast at the People's Choice Podcast Awards. This year, we hope to do it again, but we need your help. Visit podcastawards.com at the link in the description and vote for Bedtime Stories for Insomniacs under Best Fiction and Best Male Host during the nomination period. And in return, I'll tell you a really cool story. Starting now. Welcome to a very special presentation of the novel A Really Good Day by James Hosek. On its surface, it's a story about a remarkable round of golf. But if you're not a golfer, if you quickly change the channel, if you accidentally come upon a tournament on TV, I encourage you to listen anyway. It's a story about family and friendship. It's a story about redemption and second chances. It's a story about promises made and promises kept. It's a story about once-in-a-lifetime experiences. But most of all, it is one man's love letter to his family. That man was my brother, the author, James Hosek. Aside from being an amazing veterinarian, woodworker, gardener, husband, father, brother, son, and friend, he was a writer. Writers are often told to write what they know. And in this, his first book, he did that in more ways than I can count. It will make you laugh, it will make you cry, and it will make you stand up and cheer. So sit back and enjoy as Jim takes you on a fun, entertaining journey through 18 holes of golf and one man's really good day. Chapter 17, 12th Hole. Ellie rushed to the 12th tee by way of a shortcut. The golfers and officials had followed the cart path behind a small wooded hill. She cut around to the east and came up to the green from the other side. People who had already lined the fairway parted as they saw her camera. She pulled out her scorecard and clicked on her microphone to describe the hole to Jason. "A slight dogleg to the left with some water on that side," she said. "They'll need to stay in the middle to have a good line to the green. The fairway rolls downhill like on 10, so we might see some good long drives. There are a couple of sand traps around the green, but a lot of space for errant shots. The right side of the fairway is very open. If Hanover slices another one, he'll still be in good shape." Jason thanked her for the info and repeated the information for the viewing audience. As she lifted the camera to her shoulder, the golfers were coming into view, following Uncle Harold and the tournament official in their cart. Uncle Harold was smiling as he watched the USA Sports feed on his portable monitor. They were well over half a mile from the clubhouse, and he was still getting good reception. The official on the tee announced, "Mr. Patterson still holds honors." Andrew received his driver from Eric along with his ball. He produced a tee from his own pocket, and he slipped it into the ground by the golden tee markers. It was basically the same shot he had on 10. This time, his draw would help the ball follow the dogleg, rather than set him up for a decent approach to the green. He wanted to be close this time. This was a hole he planned on birdieing. It was relatively short for a par 4 on this course, only 400 yards, and a decent drive would let him place the ball very close to the pin with his pitching wedge. The water was of little to no concern, as he would stay primarily in the middle of the fairway. He lined up his shot as soon as the crowd quieted, and quickly drew back the club and swung hard at the ball. It rose and started its draw after traveling 200 yards. It followed the dogleg perfectly, and landed and bounced and bounced and rolled until it was a yard or so left of the 100-yard marker, a 300-yard drive in the center of the fairway. He had a birdie in the hand, so to speak. "He's not letting up," said Paul. "I guess your miracle shots on 11 didn't impress him too much." "I'm not trying to impress him," answered Scott. "So what do I do? Whack it out there?" "Can you make it draw like Patterson's did?" asked Paul. Scott looked at Paul with his best hound dog expression, slumping his shoulders forward. "Just asking. Listen, the right side is wide open. Aim for Patterson's ball. If it slices, you're still in good shape. And if it doesn't, try not to knock Patterson closer to the hole." Scott laughed at the thought. He put his ball on the tee and then looked around the crowd for Sarah. Behind him, Paul held up both hands like a conductor. He lifted his hands in an upbeat, then spread them out wide. The crowd received the cue as intended, and a raucous quack echoed across the course, followed by a quick flurry of laughter. Scott shook his head. How did he forget that was coming? He saw Sarah, and she gave him a thumbs up. She had been moving ahead of Scott and Paul, and he hadn't had a chance to talk to her yet. He'd try to catch her at 13, the next par 3 hole. Scott lined up his shot and took a couple of practice swings before stepping up to the ball. He drew back the driver, and his expression turned to a grimace as he swung at the ball. The plink sounded great, and he felt like he had hit it solid. It rose and rose, and turned and turned. Another slice. What was he doing wrong? It wasn't as bad as a 3-wood on the last hole. The ball bounced on the right side of the fairway and continued to roll until it had settled far into the rough on the right side. The applause was polite. Most people were waiting to see what he would do with this shot. "I think you got over 300 yards on that one," Paul said. "Yeah, but I'm still farther away from the hole than Patterson." "And that tree might be a problem." Paul pointed to an ash that was positioned on the right side of the fairway and looked to be in a direct path between Scott's ball and the green. "I'll just hit over it." "Yeah," Paul said. "Good plan." "Is that bad?" Sarah asked, as the three started walking down the fairway. "He certainly didn't hit it like Andrew Patterson," commented Sally. "But with his luck, he can turn any bad shot around." "He'll have to hit it out of the rough-cut grass and over that tree," Gina pointed out. "Why do they call it the rough? Why not tough? Like you said, it's a harder shot." The women giggled at her analysis. "Well, Scott's still 2 shots ahead. Even if Patterson picks up 1 or 2 strokes, he still has a chance." "Oh, I don't care if he wins," said Sarah. The other 2 stopped and stared at her. Sarah took another couple of steps before stopping herself. "If you had heard him this morning, he was up at the crack of dawn, so nervous about today, so worried he would embarrass himself in front of the other golfers. He's got nothing to prove to anyone now. He could have stopped after that hole-in-one, and everyone would have remembered that guy who was on TV. He and Paul are having a blast. It'd be nice if he could beat Patterson, but even second place is somewhere he never imagined he'd be." "You're right," said Sally. "I guess I'm just so anxious to root against Andrew. Cecily Waterston will be unbearable if he wins. I won't hear the end of it." "He's leading with his wrists too much," said Ted Lang. "What?" asked Joe Culkin. "Hanover. Those slices. He's getting tired." "Tell him," Joe suggested. "That won't fix it," he answered. "Why not?" "Because then he'll be thinking about that. He needs something else." "Well, think of something," Joe encouraged. "He may be running out of saves soon." "I'll think about it," Ted said. Then quietly, almost to himself, "I'll think about it." Karen had seen the helicopter coming in and pushed her way back through the crowd. After she got through most of the people, she followed the 11th fairway to the passage through the trees. A smartly dressed woman stood near the clubhouse, her hand shading her eyes as she scanned the area. In a moment, she saw Karen standing on the 10th green and waved at her, a small paper bag in her hand. Karen smiled. April had come. Next to her was a tall man wearing khaki slacks, a knit golf shirt, and sweater. He seemed a little bored. Karen walked as quickly as her shoes would let her. Things were looking up. Scott and Paul found the ball pretty quickly. The taller grass hid it, but not completely. The flag on top of the pin could be seen through the yellowing leaves of the ash tree that stood about 30 feet tall in front of him. "About 125 yards to the pin that way," said Paul, pointing at the tree. "Up and over," said Scott. "You hit a branch and you don't know where it's going. You hit the trunk, it could end up right here at your feet." "What's my alternative?" "Hit it low under the branches and roll it up on the green with a 3-iron. If I hit it too hard, I'm screwed. Too light, I'm screwed. You just need to get it on the green, then 2-putt in for the par." "I'll take the pitching wedge," decided Scott. "I'm going over the top." "Good choice," agreed Paul. "I thought you wanted me to hit it low." "Just an idea, Scott." "That's what you're paying me for." "I'm not paying you. And you're getting your money's worth," he added. They laughed. It would be hard to get under the ball in the tall grass, but he had little choice. He took some practice swings, getting a feel for how the grass affected the club head as it passed through. If he could only hit the ball with that swing, he thought, as he stepped up and laid the club on the grass behind the ball. Andrew knew there was no way Hanover would get the ball up over the tree in that tall grass. He almost laughed as he watched the golfer take his practice swings. What a waste, he thought. He might as well hit it with his putter. The officials called for quiet, and Hanover started his backswing. Andrew saw Hanover's head come up and back ever so slightly. As the club hit the ball, it didn't loft into the air as Hanover had intended. He had hit the leading edge of the club square on the ball and sent it rocketing low towards the tree. It hit a branch and deflected up and to the right. The errant ball went over the green toward more trees that bordered the water hazard behind it. As the ball entered the trees, a wooden crack echoed across the fairway. After what seemed like seconds, but couldn't have been more than an instant, the ball arced up and out of the trees, back toward the green. It landed on the fringe and rolled until it was sitting an inch or two on the green, no more than 10 yards from the hole. "Son of a," muttered Andrew. The crowd was silent in disbelief. Half of them didn't know what had happened. The ball had gone in so many directions. Scott had heard the second collision with a tree, but the yellowing ash had blocked his view. He ran to his left to get a sight of the green. At that moment, he saw something white float out of the trees on the opposite end of the green and fly back toward the pin. He blinked and craned his head forward. He shook his head vigorously. Paul was standing beside him. He turned and asked, "Is that my ball?" Paul nodded as applause rippled through the crowd. The astonishment of the amazing shot was wearing off. "Not exactly what I had in mind, but it'll do." "Wow," said Scott and smiled. "It'll do for sure." "What happened?" asked Sally. She had heard the sound of a ball hitting wood and then the applause. "My husband is the luckiest man alive," said Sarah. "What, apart from being married to you?" asked Sally. "He was right to think he might embarrass himself today, but someone is watching over him." "The golf fairies," suggested Gina. "Golf fairies," agreed Sarah. "He pulled his head up on that one," said Ted Lang. "If he hadn't hit that tree, Patterson might be looking at the lead right now." "What can you do?" "I don't want to risk getting him disqualified by giving him any advice on how to play. But I have something in mind, Joe. I'll catch up to him after this hole." Joe thought about writing a $5,000 check to Andrew Patterson. He had the money and could afford to do it, but the loss would be more than financial to him. It would be something Patterson could hold over him. He knew he wouldn't be playing as well as Scott Hanover was up to this point, but if Hanover self-destructed now, it was Patterson's game to lose. "That was just pure luck," Jason Bernard said as the shot replayed on the monitor. The live shot returned, showing Scott Hanover's ball sitting calmly on the green, waiting to be hit for perhaps an easy par. I'm sure he didn't intend on hitting the ball that way, and it could have just as easily ended up in the water rather than on the green. Once again, Andrew Patterson is feeling the pressure of Scott Hanover's run of luck versus his skill and planning. At this point, it's a pretty even match for the 2.5 holes they've played together. The monitor was switched to Patterson lining up his shot. He took a partial backswing and knocked the ball up in a beautiful arc. A strip of turf followed it, just like Jason had seen pros do. It landed on the green 2 yards beyond the pin, leaving a dark dent on the soft surface. From there, the backspin Patterson had expertly applied rolled the ball backwards toward the pin, and it stopped 18 inches away. The crowd cheered the superbly played shot, and Patterson walked towards the green, absently handing his club to his caddy. "He's thinking birdie," added Jason. "Unless we see a miracle putt from Hanover, this match is now down to a 1-stroke difference." He turned and saw Bob shaking his head slowly, blowing a deeply held breath of air out between his lips. USA Sports Chicago was getting its money's worth today. A commercial flipped on, and Bob got up and walked over to Jason. "We just picked up 6 more affiliates. I think we've got this showing live in 20 markets. This is getting big, Jason. You're doing a great job." "Yeah, I wish I knew what I was doing." "Just listen to the voices in your head and put it in your own words. So far, it's been very impressive." "Thanks," Jason said. "Coffee?" Bob asked. "Sounds great." "Just don't spill any." "I'd be surprised if he missed that one," Paul said. They were on the far side of the green now, and Andrew had just marked his ball with a giant gold coin. "He won't," agreed Scott. "I'll just have to get this one in." "There's a little break to the right," Paul said. "I see it," Scott answered. The crowd quieted as Scott lined up his shot. He swung the club back for a couple of practice swings and then stepped up. His head turned as his eyes followed the path his ball would travel. Back and forth, 3 times. He drew the club back and hit the ball. It rolled and, as predicted, followed the break, but missed the hole by 6 inches to the left and behind, and was still a yard away by the time it stopped. "Closer to the hole," said Paul. "Closer to the hole," agreed Scott. They walked up to the new position, trying not to look at Patterson to see if he was smiling. If Scott missed this putt, the match would be tied, and most likely that was it. He was riding his luck right now, and it seemed to be stretching pretty thin if the last couple of holes were any indication. He squatted and eyed the path to the hole. It appeared straight. "Just hit it at the hole and mean it," advised Paul. "It wants to go in. You saw what it did before bouncing off those trees to avoid the water." "That's true. I've never seen a ball try so hard to get on the green before." "It's dedicated, I'll say that for it." "So basically all I need to do is give it a nudge. It'll do the rest." "Precisely," said Paul. "Okay." Scott stood and lined his feet parallel to the ball's intended path. He took 2 practice strokes, and then he stepped forward 3 inches. He felt his hands gripping the putter like he was trying to strangle a goose. He breathed deeply and relaxed his grip. He hit the ball, and it rolled straight, landing in the hole with a gratifying plunk. Walking over, he pulled the ball out. He looked down and saw that Patterson's coin marker was a golden US dollar. It gleamed in the sunlight and appeared in mint condition, unmarked or dulled by time. Patterson passed him as he left the green. He laid his ball down carefully in front of his marker and picked up the coin, sequestering it back into his pocket. He had planned on birdieing this hole, and his approach shot had guaranteed it. Hanover had just given him another stroke. He placed his putter behind the ball, adjusted his feet, and twisted his head to look at the hole. He popped the ball in as easily as sitting in a chair. Everyone watching knew there was no other outcome, and they cheered for him once again. It was now a one-stroke game, and there were still 6 holes to play. "Darn," Sally said. "You got it in." "Hard to miss from there," Gina said. "Ooh." Sarah's cry was one of surprise, mixed with a sprinkle of pain and confusion. She started to take a few deep breaths, remembering what they had learned in their Lamaze class. She had to focus on breathing through the pain. This was the worst one today, nothing like any of the previous contractions. Did that happen in false labor? Was she pushing too hard walking around the course like this? The 2 women on either side of Sarah recognized her distress and reached out to help steady her. She gripped each one of them on their upper arms, and Sally muffled a cry of pain as Sarah's hand squeezed her bicep like a talon. "Contraction?" Gina asked. Sarah paused long enough in her breathing to stammer, "Oh, yeah." "I'll go get Scott," Sally offered. "No," gasped Sarah. Her breathing started to return to normal, and the sharp pain in her abdomen dissipated more slowly than it had come. "I'll be fine in a minute." "You need to get to the hospital," Sally said. "Not until they are 6 minutes apart," Sarah told her. "I can't be in labor. I'm not due for 2 weeks. "I'm going to tell him," Gina said. "He's got to finish this game," Sarah said, panicking. "I want him to finish." Sally glanced at her watch. "Well, I'm timing you. If they get to 6 minutes apart, we'll tell him," she said. Sarah nodded. "I'll be fine." She released her grip and stood up. "Let's go. I don't want to miss any of this." Karen reached the clubhouse and was a bit surprised to see the expressions on April's and her guests' faces. "What happened to you?" asked April. She handed the paper bag to Karen. "What?" asked Karen. Then she realized what a mess she must be. Mud on her shoes and feet, a torn blouse, her hair unkempt and frazzled. "I've just been out watching the game." She opened the bag and breathed a sigh of relief to see her sneakers from the office and a cell phone. "Tough game," commented the man. "Karen Blakely, this is Tim Carousel, Callaway Golf. Mr. Carousel, Karen Blakely, our top agent." Karen held out her hand and Carousel shook it. "This Pattison guy is losing," he commented, waving back at the scoreboard. Karen noted he had a British accent, along with an ugly set of teeth. She looked at the updated score. Andrew had just picked up another stroke on Hanover. He was only behind by 1. "There are still 6 holes to go," Karen said. "He's already picked up 2 strokes in 3 holes. He'll win it, no doubt about it." He nodded at the monitor. "He's the colorfully dressed character there?" he asked. "Yes," Karen said. "Well, he's got something, if not style," pointed out Carousel. "Exactly," agreed April, sucking up as best she could. She shot Karen a glare and handed her the new cell phone. "Any place to get a drink around here?" he asked. "It's a forest preserve," Karen pointed out. "Meaning?" "They don't allow alcohol in the forest preserves, Mr. Carousel." "You've got to be kidding. It's a bloody golf course. There has to be alcohol," he insisted with his undeniable logic. "I'm sorry," Karen said. "Bloody useless," muttered Carousel. "Let's watch the next couple of holes on the monitor, and then we can cut to the 16th green to watch the last 3 live. It's a madhouse out there now, but I figured out a shortcut to get us there ahead of the rest of the crowd." "Sounds like a good plan." April ushered Carousel back to the clubhouse. "How about a soft drink?" she offered. "I don't suppose they have any tea?" he asked. April looked at Karen, who scrunched up her face and shoulders in the wordless expression meaning, "I don't know." "We'll see," April said. Jake watched as the 3 went into the clubhouse. He looked back at the scoreboard. Scott's 3-stroke lead was down to 1. It wasn't looking good. He glanced at the map on his scorecard and looked for the break in the trees, midway on the left side of the 10th fairway, that would get him to the 13th green and the 14th tee. He decided to head down and pick up the action there. Waiting here was going to destroy whatever nerves he had left. Gina was still with Scott's wife, Sarah, and the USGA sports guy's wife, Sally. The fact that she felt comfortable enough to leave him alone gave him the confidence to know he would make it through this day. It was nice to have something important to worry about. It seemed like Scott Hanover was going to provide that something today. "Scott!" shouted Ted Lang. Scott Hanover turned to see the man he had met earlier waving from the crowd. "Mr. Lang! Hey, how about this? I guess you were right about there being a great game and everyone. Today is my day. Well, except for the last couple of holes. Had a couple of bad shots there. My slice keeps wanting to come in. You're doing great, Scott, and call me Ted. Any advice?" "Wouldn't want to get you disqualified," he said. "Not very kosher to give or receive advice during a game." Right, Scott realized, as he remembered reading something about that in the Rules of Golf book that sat in the top drawer of his desk at work. It was casual reading whenever he needed to get his mind off the rat race. "Just remember what I said. Play golf. Don't play against Patterson." He held out his left hand. Scott looked a little confused and extended his left hand for the reverse handshake. Lang gripped it and squeezed, seeming to almost crush the bones in his hand. "Good luck, son," he added, and let go. Scott quelled a grimace and flexed his hand a few times to get the blood back into the tissues. "Come on," Paul called. Scott turned to jog after his caddy and the rest of the crowd up a little hill to the 13th tee. "What did you do?" asked Joe, noting the confused expression and pain on Hanover's face. "Adjusted his swing a little. With his left hand hurting, he'll grip tighter with the right. Keep the club face from opening up." "Are you serious?" Joe asked. "That'll really work?" "I have no idea," Ted answered honestly. "But I couldn't let him keep swinging like he was." "I suppose. But you must have bruised him pretty good." "He'll be fine. I'm just an old man." "We'll see, I guess," Joe said, thinking it might work. He followed Ted and the rest of the crowd to the next tee. Thank you for listening to A Really Good Day, a novel by James Hosek, narrated by Rich Hosek. If you're interested in purchasing a hardcover edition of this story for yourself or a golfer in your life, visit gymbooks.myshopify.com. You'll get free shipping in the United States. You'll also get the complete audiobook and ebook editions with your purchase. And make sure to subscribe to the mailing list for updates about the upcoming release of his Doctor at Mystery series, cozy mysteries about a crime-solving veterinarian. Thanks again, and all the very best. Seriously, if you can pop on over to podcastawards.com and help me out, that'd be great. Bedtime stories for insomniacs, best fiction, and best male host. I owe you one.